Before we can talk about stitching the gathered lace to the flat lace, we need to talk about actually gathering the lace, because this is something that may be new to someone, or there may be some tips that I have that are new to a seasoned heirloom sewer. So in heirloom laces, this is the header threads along the top here of the lace, and most heirloom seamstresses will take the very top thread, which is this thread with the loops on it. That's a heavier thread, and they will pull that thread to gather the lace. And that works fine, but it doesn't give, in my opinion, the smoothest results, because as you can see, you have areas where it's just hard to manage. And when you're zigzagging this down to get it so that it's not going to catch and put a little fold in the pleat like that. So I did not invent this method. I learned this from going to one of Debbie Glenn's schools, but what she taught, and I had never heard of before, was to pull all the gathering threads. Now, you can't just start out by pulling all the gathering threads. It's not that easy. And every different lace is going to have a different number of gathering threads. So I started to pull all of these. You can see I've got 2, 5, 6, 7, 8. I don't know, this one might have about 10. I have pulled header threads where the lace was a narrower lace than this, but I think it had around 35 header threads in it. So that was quite the challenge. But you can see when you do it this way how you end up with this very flat, almost like a ribbon. It's a flat area that you can stitch. So as long as you zigzag to the edge of your header, you're never going to get those funky pleats. Let me find the other end here. You're never going to get the funky looking pleats that you would get when you just pull one gathering thread. So I wanted to see if I could show the difference. And you can see how this one is going to be much easier to zigzag on and control the gathers and get a pretty result, as opposed to this one where you've got to work over these bumpy areas in the lace. So when you want to begin pulling multiple header threads, I would start with this heaviest one. And then after you've got that one going for a few inches, then find another one. And I tend to start with the heavier threads. There's typically heavier threads and then lighter weight ones. And if you've got skinnier threads, you can pull a couple at a time. But I do that until you have most of the header threads going. And then you'll end up with that same type of look. And you want to be gentle as you move these gathers along. And again, if you hit a snag, an area where they don't want to all pull and it seems like something is stuck, then go back to pulling a couple threads at a time until you get past that area, and the rest of it goes pretty smoothly. So I always use this method because I just love the way that that flat header surface ends up, as opposed to the way that it looked when you were just pulling the one heavier thread at the top. Once you have all the gathering threads pulled, then it's just a matter of distributing the gathers of the lace. And you can see with all those threads pulled how easy it is to move the lace back and forth to adjust the gathers to where you like them. Now the question always comes up of how much fullness should there be? And while that is for the most part personal preference, I tend to go with somewhere between an inch and 1.5 to 1 3/4 the amount of fullness. I like that look. That's about 1 3/4. If you have twice the amount, they tend to get so bunched up that you really lose the pretty design in the lace. But if you like your gathers more full, that is certainly an option for you. It's just, you just try to, once you have all this pulled, you want them all to look similar. You don't want to have too much gathers here and then not enough on this side. So at this point, you're ready to stitch the gathered lace to the flat lace. Now that the lace has been gathered, I am ready to attach it to the fancy band. So we'll be attaching gathered lace to flat lace. This is the fancy band that was attached in a previous video, and after finishing all the zigzag stitching and attaching the fancy band together, I went ahead and I starched it and I allowed it to dry again so that it is as stiff as possible. To do this technique, I prefer to use the open-toed foot, and you're going to want to set your machine to a zigzag. The length of your stitch should be a 1.0. The width of your stitch needs to be wide enough so that when it zigzags, one swing of the needle will come to the outside of this header thread, and then the other swing of the needle will go to the outside of that header thread. You are trying to encase both header threads. So this again will vary depending on how wide the header threads are on your lace. And so I usually start that process by hand cranking the first couple stitches to see what width is correct. I use 60 or 80 weight thread. You can use the 60 weight Metler thread. That can be used for the construction as well as the lace work, or you can use an 80 weight thread. I only currently have this in yellow right now, so obviously I'm not using that on this project, but the Aurifil 80 weight also comes in white, or you can use Madeira Katona thread in an 80 weight. And with your lightweight threads, you need a lightweight needle. So your needle can be a 60 or 65 Microtex needle if you're using the 80 weight thread, and the 65 or 70 weight Microtex needle if you're using the 60 weight thread. You can also use the universal needles, so if that's what you have on hand, they will work perfectly fine. If you have to order needles, I would recommend ordering the Microtex. I also like to use extra magnification when I'm stitching. It really helps me to get a better view of the stitches, and what I like to use is the Mag Eyes is what it's called. I will link to those below. I like these because you can buy the lens in different strengths. So if you only need a little bit of extra strength, like a 2 or a 2.5, you can do that. But if you really want to zoom in and have your thread look like rope, you can get the 4 or the 4.5. And since I already wear glasses, these are nice because you wear it like a headband, and the glasses portion of it can flip up and down as needed to see what you're doing. For this lace combination, I needed to set my stitch width at a 3.5 so that it would encase all of the header threads. And I don't go too fast for this process because I only want to do this one time. But the open-toed foot and the Mag Eyes really make a big difference for me. I also like to use the needle down option so that anytime I stop, the needle is left in the fabric so that the laces don't shift around at that point. I can always lift up the foot if I need to, but the needle stays in the fabric. Here is the finished fancy band with the lace attached to the bottom, and you can see how nicely the zigzag compressed those two header threads together to create one nice solid line, and it is practically invisible. Maybe this is something you haven't tried before. This just happens to be my preferred method once I've tried it and I see how much easier it is for sewing. So it does take a little bit longer to gather the threads when you're pulling all of them, but I save so much time in the stitching of it that it's well worth it to me. If you have enjoyed these little teaching sessions on YouTube here, please consider subscribing to my channel by clicking the button below.